Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Charlotte Mason Enrichment Podcast. My name is Elise Thompson. I am the host of this show, and I'm so glad that you joined us today. We are a brand new Charlotte Mason podcast, and our whole goal, desire, aim, whatever word you want to use, is just to encourage and to equip families to live a rich life utilizing Charlotte Mason's philosophy of education. And yes, her philosophy of education is for education, but it's so much more. It's so much deeper and richer. And so we are going to be taking these episodes to really dive into what that looks like and how we can implement them into our everyday lives. And so I am so honored to have with me on the podcast today my friend and mentor, Rebecca Gorgas. Welcome, Rebecca. So glad you joining me today.
I am honored that you asked me, Elise. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for being here. So if you have never heard Rebecca, she was one of our breakout session speakers from the Charlotte Mason Enrichment Conference that happened this past summer. But Rebecca is a mom of two amazing young adults now. She has homeschooled them, graduated them using Charlotte Mason's philosophy of education. And so although she has graduated her kids, she has not stopped. She's actually probably picked up the pace a little bit. She is teaching several other students this year. And I feel like you're more passionate than I've ever seen you before. Yes, you're passionate with your kids, but you really believe in something when you continue on, when you don't quote unquote to. And so Rebecca has a lot to share and that we can all glean from. And so today's topic is we are talking all about the volumes. That's right. All 6 of the volumes that Charlotte has left us. Man, it's like a little kiss from heaven on how to embrace her philosophy of education, which, although she wrote quite a while ago, it feels even more relevant now, maybe than it did when she wrote it. And so we're going to talk about that today. But before we do, Rebecca, can you bring us all into your life and how you started on this journey of educating your children using Charlotte Mason's principles?
Yeah. So my firstborn child started out in a little tiny private Waldorf school in Virginia, where my hometown is. So I've been here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the last 10.5 years. So we started out in a little Waldorf school, and that was fine. My youngest wasn't school age yet. And then he ran into problems with reading. And so my husband and I were discussing what to do about that. And we thought, my husband thought, let's just get her a tutor for reading. And I thought, well, she's just a little girl. She was in 2nd grade at the time. She doesn't need to go to school all day and then go and do tutoring all day, more school. She needs to be playing. So I had some friends who were home educating, not using Charlotte Mason. I had never heard the name Charlotte Mason before. And so, but I thought, gosh, if they can do it, so can I. I'm just talking home education in general. So we pulled her out of school. So from 3rd grade on, our daughter was home educated. Our son has always been homeschooled, just because he's the baby of the family. And it quickly, even before Charlotte Mason, it quickly became an entire way of life for us, and we knew there was no way we were going. My daughter was in 3rd grade. I was kind of mimic Waldorf, and I was, of course, very drawn to everything literature-based, being out in nature, and all of those things. Waldorf is absolutely not Charlotte Mason. But the things that are the same are the things that drew me to Waldorf. So eventually, when I discovered who Charlotte Mason was, I was just told that just means you read really good books and you don't use And I'm like, well, we're already doing that. I must have been a Charlotte Mason educator, and I didn't even know it. Now, I really wasn't. I didn't really understand what that meant. But hey, I was taking steps in the right direction at least, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't until my daughter was in 6th grade that I began to learn a little bit more about Charlotte Mason, reading books that other people wrote about. And she was halfway through 6th grade when my husband was transferred out here to Oklahoma. We moved out here, and I immediately met the women that founded the community that you and I, Elise, are a part of. And it was a brand new community at that point. It had just started. And I just fell in with them. I can't say I was a founding member, but at that time there were only about 15 families in our community. And listeners, there are close to 100 families now. So, at that time I wasn't a founding member, but I was pretty much right here in the beginning. And at that point, we were all trying to figure out, what is this Charlotte Mason thing? We had all read books about Charlotte Mason. We all had, their oldest children were all about the age of my youngest. So we just began to try to explore this together. And pretty quickly, we're like, well, if we want to learn about Charlotte Mason, we should probably read the book she actually wrote herself.
Yeah.
And so a study group began. So our founding leader in our community was Rachel Bird. I'm sure you'll interview her at some point. She had already read a few of the volumes all by herself. And then somebody said, well, let's do volume 6 together. So I'm like, I'm game, let's do it. So I start reading volume 6 with this group, and I am not exaggerating when I say it transformed not just my school, our homeschool, but my entire life. It transformed my marriage, my relationships with my kids, my relationships with my friends, the way I run my home. And if that sounds dramatic, it's probably because you haven't read her volume. So you think you're reading them to be a better teacher for your kids, but it will change your whole life.
Yeah.
So as soon as we finished volume 6, I was like, well, I've tried to read volume 1 all by myself like 3 times, and I never got very far because life gets in the way, and it still felt hard to read. And I know that's how they start with Charlotte Mason, but really, when we really decided this is what we're going to do, it was her volumes that we went to. And so I started a study group with volume 1. Am I answering more than you wanted right now?
Yeah, it was great. Keep going.
Yeah, so I started this study group with volume 1, and I started it not because I was any kind of expert in it. I was not. I had no idea what I was doing. But the more I read and the more I clumsily implemented, the better I got at it. And the more my habits of how education works were instilled in me, the more my habits improved in how I ran my own household, the more my thoughts changed, because Charlotte Mason is all about that and how we literally are responsible for the shape of our brain. She was so far ahead of the rest of the world. And if you think she's not relevant today just because she was writing in the early 1900s, it's so relevant today. It is so relevant. Because humans are still the same. We're still the same. So we began volume 1, and I had this group come, and because they were coming to my house, and I was supposedly the one leading it, I had to make sure my homework was done every single month. So I finally was reading through her volume, and I didn't always know or understand fully what I was reading. But as Charlotte Mason says, we don't need to be the showman of the universe. We don't need to know it all. We learn mind to mind. And what greater mind to learn about this philosophy of education than the one who developed it? And we talked about things that we didn't understand or struggled with, or things that struck us in a deep way. And we grew and we learned together. And when we finished volume 1, we started volume 2. And at this point, I have read all of her volumes. The only one I've only read once is volume 5, Formation of Character, and I read that all by myself. I didn't have a group that wanted to do that one. Kind of a different one, a strange one, harder to do in a group. I have made sure it's been really important to me that in our community, ever since that first time we did volume 1, that if there were new moms, any moms in our community that hadn't read volume 1, I wanted to be sure every single year there was a volume 1 study.
That's so good.
Couple of years in a row, I've led more than one volume study at a time. Reading 3 volumes. I'm reading volume 1 with a group that's never read it. I'm reading volume 2 with my group that read volume 1 last year. And I'm reading volume 4 ourselves, the ones who wrote directly to students, with a group of middle school boys. So
That is
now you need to ask me
awesome.
specific questions.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back and dissect it because the reason that I felt would be helpful to talk about this is I have come across, people who do Charlotte Mason, but have never read her volumes. And I think it's becoming more and more of a trend of people who are, all in on doing this method of education, but are probably intimidated to read the volumes. And I get it because when I first started started using this method of her philosophies of education, and I got the first book, I was like, what am I reading? Like, I read it, but I don't get it. And it also made me feel really better about myself, honestly, to talk to you and to talk to other ladies that are in the community that have graduated kids and are a lot further along, that said that was my experience too, and like, just for context, like, you've got people who are highly educated, people who may have more gone the entrepreneurial street smart way, like, you've got all in between. So it's not like, oh, because you have a degree and or several degrees that I can understand it. Like, it is different when you first start reading it because of the time that she wrote it in, and she makes references to people of her day that we've never heard of. So there's a lot of nuances to why it is a little intimidating to start, but how vital it is to actually read the volumes and not just to listen to a podcast like this, or to read a blog post, or to read an Instagram post, with maybe like one of her quotes. Those things are all good and they're all helpful, but I feel like we have to understand where they fit, right? They're good reminders, they're good encouragement, but I do feel like it can't be it. And so, yeah, go ahead.
One thing is that part of why people feel intimidated is they begin reading and they might feel a little confused because the Victorian era writer, and she's from Britain as well, right? So she's from Great Britain, an English lady from the Victorian era, and the language feels different. The like you said, some of the references feel foreign to us. Just the turn of phrase is different. And so it feels confusing at first. If you've ever decided to take on any of the classics, like reading Charles Dickens, the first time you pick up a Charles Dickens, if you've never read it before, it feels really difficult. But the more you read it, the easier it becomes. Your brain adjusts and figures it out. And it's the same with Charlotte Mason. So the first time I began reading her, volume 6 was my first one, and then volume 1, it still felt challenging for me to get the full access of the information. Well, I read her now, and it is not at all hard, like not even slightly. And I'm not really any smarter now than I was when I began 8 years ago. I just began to, our brains learn and adjust, and I got to turn this notification
So I
off.
feel like that's like a really big takeaway, is that if you just will start, it will get easier. And I feel like we need to say that more. Just start and it will get easier.
It will. Just
Yeah.
like we expect our kids to do things that are hard at first, it gets
Mhm.
easier. Same with, and doing it with a group where you can get together and talk about it. Like, and the thing is, some of my moms feel intimidated to lead if if I wind up sick and I can't go to the group. I'm like, hey, you guys could do this without me. And nowadays, they always cancel and they want to do it a different time. They feel too intimidated to do it without me because they feel like, oh, Rebecca's the expert. But when I started this whole endeavor, I was not the expert. When we did volume 6, none of us were experts. We just wanted to
Mhm.
learn together. When I
Mhm.
began leading my first volume, I was not an expert. I had
Yeah.
no idea what I was doing. You don't
Mhm.
have to be an expert to read it. I still don't feel like an expert, but I probably am considering how many times I've read her volume and made mistakes and corrected and whatever.
Mhm.
And then you look at my grown-up kids and you're like, well, there's some pretty fantastic adults if I can brag
Yeah.
on my kids.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
they're amazing. And there are lots of factors that went into that. But I am telling you, a huge piece of it is because they were Charlotte Mason educated, and it
Mhm.
winds up suffusing all of your life. It's not just going to school.
Yeah.
And it's
That's
reading the volume. It's it's really absorbing and taking that in and following her practices. I mean, she says education is a life. It is true.
yeah.
It's not just a life in quotes for your kids. It really is
Mhm.
incorporated into how we do everything.
That's so good. That's so good. So, okay. So somebody has heard us talk about it. And they're like, okay, I'm going to go for it. What tips would you give them if they are going to start, reading the volumes? What would you suggest starting with, and what other things perspectives could kind of help them to digest it?
So I have a point of view that is not held by everyone. There are so many different points of view. So I'll just tell you my own opinion,
Mhm.
and that is that it depends. So I started in volume 6 because a study group was starting in volume 6. So if somebody's offering a group to read a volume and it's, I don't know, volume 3, just jump in and start with volume 3. There are lots
Yeah.
of people that tell you, oh, no, you need to start with volume 1 and then read volume 2 and read straight on through. I just don't happen to agree with it. I think start with whatever group you can find is the
Mhm.
first thing.
Mhm.
If there isn't a group, how old are your kids? Do you have kids that are barely school age, that aren't quite school age? Definitely start with volume 1. Volume 1, home education. Because that's not, her title isn't saying, oh, you're going to homeschool. That's not what she meant by that. She meant the education that begins at home, and that education begins when they're babies.
Mhm.
So home education is like first to 9 years old. Well, let's say you're coming into this brand new. Volume 1 will still be very useful for the mama whose oldest child is 10, 11, 12 years old, right? She doesn't have any littles anymore. Volume
Mhm.
1 is still, there's so much information in there that applies to all the ages, including whatever your age, right? However, you're just getting started. You're trying to figure it out. I think volume 6 is a great one to begin on. It's like an overview of everything that includes all the way up through high school.
Mhm.
Volume 1 doesn't touch on middle school, high school age.
Mhm.
So if you've never read her volume and you only have the older kids, I say start with volume 6, but then go back and
Right.
read volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, right?
Mhm.
Volume
Yeah.
4 is written directly to the students, but I would say read it with your kids or at least at the same time as your kids.
Okay.
And volume 5 is called Formation of Character. It's like these little tiny story vignettes. It's, it's also very good to read, but it is a completely different format than the other.
Gotcha. Very good. So you say, depending on where you're at, like what's available to you, if you want to do it in a group, go with where everyone's at and just kind of cycle through. If you're, you know, got little ones, like some people are so ahead of the game and know they want to homeschool Charlotte Mason style, and they've got youngins, start with volume 1. If you've got older, start with volume 6. So really, you can
my
start anywhere.
opinion. That's
Yeah,
my opinion. There are people with other opinions out there.
sure.
Um,
I'm
and I'm
asking you.
not saying they're not valid, but that's where I'm coming from and having
Yeah,
read all the volumes and kind of my perspective on it.
that's so good. That's so good, Rebecca. So you've kind of already done it, but can you kind of give us just a little brief synopsis of each of the volumes?
Mm-hmm. So volume 1 is called Home Education, and it really concentrates on 0 to 9 and a lot about habit formation, a lot about that you don't really want formal lessons before the age of 6 or maybe even 7. And so there's a whole lot in there about smaller children and the very earliest of education, like Form 1. And I guess I don't use amplified. I think they just would call that year 1 or first grade, right? So, and Charlotte Mason doesn't really have anything particularly formal for kindergarten. So, but that would cover what would you do with a kid that was kindergarten age and all the things there. And it really sets up the foundation of her philosophy before she's even talking very much about school age lessons.
Okay.
So that's primarily what home education is about. So number 2 is called Parents and Children, and that really expands on it. And then it gets a little, I'm reading it right now, so I should be able to like whip this out and
I'm
tell
having you
you
narrate.
really easily.
What you've shared or what you've
I
read.
know. And we literally just had a lesson. We just had our class, our study yesterday, and I'm like, what's this? Or Tuesday, I guess, is when we had it. But okay, so in volume 2, it's like, what is the role of the parent with their child? So it's got like a whole like several chapters on parents as inspirers and our God-given role and the you were at mine. What you were there on Tuesday night?
Yes. All the things. I'm like, 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Yeah. I think like just a very like simple explanation would be our role as parents. And I feel like I said this at the end of our book club meeting, but it's, a lot of times when you have younger kids, especially, you're reading all these parenting books and like, how do I raise my kids? And it's like, man, this is the best parenting book I've read so far.
It
Um,
is.
yeah.
It is, and that's why I say it'll transform your whole life, not just what you do at school. Because we are, 3 months into our reading. We're going to take like 9 months to read this book. So we're about 3 months in, and we haven't even gotten to the school part of it, right? See, will, one of these chapters is parent as schoolmaster or something like that, right? Parents is who we train them. Parents have so it's it's the parent's relationship with the child, and of course he talks even more about habit training, like he did in volume 1. He talks even more about how the parent is the child's first vision of what is God like, and that's an important role, right?
Right.
When our young children look at they see God. Are we actually representing who God is or something very much not who God is, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that affects children as they grow into adulthood, the rest of their lives. Thank God he gives us some grace to overcome our messes. But also, if we screw this up, it can take our kids a lifetime to overcome that. And I grew up in a very messy, complicated family where what I saw God as, because of what I saw in my parents, was angry and aloof, and that I am a bother, and that I better keep my head down and not cause any trouble. That's what I'm now working here in my mid-50s to still overcome that internalized belief of who God is. That's why it's so important that we are the first vision of what our children have of God.
Yeah.
I hope we don't screw that up.
Yeah.
Right?
No pressure.
Whereas, and I speak so to all day long because it really is that important. Whereas
Right.
my children, not trying to pat my back because it is by the grace of God and the help of Charlotte Mason, that my children see God as a father who loves and adores them.
Yeah.
And who does indeed have high standards, but ultimately loves and adores them.
Yeah.
What a difference,
Right.
right? And my
Right.
daughter is now a teacher. She's my daughter's a professional ballet teacher, ballet dancer, and she's also a ballet teacher. And she said to me the other day, just that children are never a bother. They are never a burden. They are children. Children don't have the power to affect her emotions, no matter how they're behaving, because
Wow.
they're children. That doesn't mean they don't need to be corrected and guided and directed, but like they don't have the power to affect her feelings, her emotions, her whatever, because again, she was raised with innocence and God in our home, right?
Right. Yeah.
I think I went up on a rabbit trail, but I promise you it still all connects to
Yeah.
this way of living. And we really, really get it when we begin reading her volumes and implementing it. It's so Holy Spirit led.
Yeah. She really was. She really was. I couldn't agree with that statement more because of the fact that what she wrote in the 1900s is still relevant. Like you can't not be Holy Spirit inspired and have such a lasting impact. Like you really can't. So
I mean, these books are basically 100 years old now.
yeah, yeah, and they still hit.
Oh, they
So
do.
tell me about book 3, 4,
Book
5, and
3 is school education.
Mhm.
So that's a little bit more of setting up your curriculum.
So it's a little more
Part, yeah. It's very, very practical. It's very practical.
That's great. And then book 4 is ourselves, and you said
That's
is more for the student.
It's written directly to the student, but it will also help me. It helps. I think it's great. Like there's great truths in there. Like what, and he writes it in such a way that it's quite acceptable, and he uses this metaphor of like a country and its government. So it's called man soul. So who we are and the various things that govern. And he talks a lot about things that are to be our servant. But the flip side of that is if it becomes our master and there's a negative flip side that we need to watch out for.
Yeah.
It's really fantastic. And that's divided into 2 books. So volume 4, ourselves, actually has like a book 1 and a book 2 within it. And most of the time people read that over 2 years. So read book 1 in 1 year, book 2 the next. Occasionally life happens and they'll spread it over 3 years. And the second part of ourselves, it's been a few years since I've read it, but I believe it really talks a lot about justice. I don't remember. Sorry. It's been a few years since I read this.
Yeah.
Like my kids were all grown and they were reading in middle school.
Yeah.
So it's been a while. I'm really having fun though, reading it again with this. I have a class of 12 middle school boys. So they're between the ages of 11 and 13. And they're really enjoying it. Like at first, it's like, that's kind of a funny way to write and say that. Some of it feels a little weird and funny, but they are still absolutely accessing all the information and doing wonderful narrations on it, and they drew a map of Man's Hole.
Wow.
It's terrific.
Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, hey, relevant for middle school boys.
it is. It
Yeah.
is. And even if you have, like, my daughter read it in ninth grade because
Mhm.
I didn't know any better until then. Like, my firstborn kid got the least pure Charlotte Mason of my kids. My son pretty through most of the way through, right?
Yeah.
My daughter less so, but it so transforms her life. It's never too late
Yeah.
that she's positive she will home educate her kids someday with Charlotte Mason. And she calls me all the time, Mom, how would I implement DM with my ballet class? What about this? What about that? Because those principles remain the same.
That's strong. I think that's a win. If your adult child, number one, is not scarred and fully convinced that she wants to kind of reproduce what she received is great. And then even as a 20-something-year-old, using that in her sphere of influence with her ballet students, I feel like, man, what more could you ask for? That's fantastic.
Mhm.
So, okay, so you
And
said,
did you ever think you could Charlotte Mason a ballet class?
yeah.
Again, because we're following principles and a methodology rather than a system of boxes to check, you absolutely can. You can still
Yeah.
bring that philosophy
So good.
in.
That's so good. Okay,
I
so
teach my preschoolers at church.
that's so great. I love
I
it.
no longer know any other way to teach.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so rich. So anything else is not as good. So, okay, so you said book 5, formation of character.
So that's like all these little vignettes, little stories that help illustrate a point.
Mhm.
So it's very different. It doesn't read at all like the other volumes. Definitely worth reading. But it is my least favorite, personally, of all the volumes. And it's actually the only volume that I've only read once.
Okay, but you did it.
I have to
Yeah.
read them all. I mean, I had to finish it, right? And I
Yeah,
didn't have a group reading it with me. And so I just had to make myself do it. And in fact, yeah. So
you did it.
I'm making it sound like it's a bad book. It's not.
It's different. It's
It's
different.
just very different. It would be a more difficult one to do with a group the way it's set up, but it's
Yeah.
definitely worthwhile to read rather. Um, it's not really telling you how to implement her method with your students. It's more like, oh gosh, again, I've only read it once and it was years ago. It's more like little stories to illustrate different things that might come up in life with your family, your
That's
children,
great.
your students. Mhm.
Yeah. So still very valuable. And then book 6, her final book. Tell us about
A
that one.
philosophy of education. So you see in that book still things from volume 1, volume 2, like from all the volumes before.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like he had just, after all those years, really fomented all of the information.
Mm-hmm.
And he covers it sweeping from basically birth through all of the school years, right through, high school. And you just see her philosophy just really boiled down in a very distinct way. Does
Mm-hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I would
Mhm.
agree. Like from what other people have told me and kind of what I've gathered is like just some really more connected, they're all connected, but more connected, concise ways to say kind of what she's been pondering and what conclusion she's come to. I feel like it is a great like end to the whole series. So
Yeah.
really enjoyed reading that one. I think that was the first volume that I read because you were leading a book study. And so I feel like it was a great introduction into to the volumes. For me, it was. So it's a great one to read. So
Ask people my favorite volume is.
What's your favorite volume?
Whichever one I'm currently reading. I'm not even kidding. Like, I think I
Yeah,
know, but then I'm reading another one. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so good. I forgot how good this is. This is
yeah,
my favorite. And
yeah.
then I'll read another volume. Oh, no, this is my favorite. So,
Yeah,
really, whichever one I happen to be reading at the
that's
time.
awesome. Yeah, they are all really great. And yeah, I hope everyone who's listening or watching, I hope you really do feel encouraged to pick up a volume, start reading it. If you don't know anybody that's reading it, I love what Rebecca did. She just asked the people around her who were doing Charlotte Mason, say, hey, what do you guys think about, um, you know, getting together and reading? I really feel like community and accountability is the key to doing anything that is difficult or out of your comfort zone. Rebecca and I connect on our diet and our eating, because it's hard for us to do it on our own, but when we do it together, it's it lightens the load for sure. And so
Accountability, man. Whether it's, well, at least what I ate.
yeah,
Or
exactly.
I got a deadline because people are going to show up and we're going to go over this reading together,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
accountability is huge. And
Mhm.
really, literally what I did was that I said to the group, I am going to read volume 1. Who wants to read it with me?
It's
And
good.
boom, we had a group. We had a
Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
And so if you know anybody who has any interest in this way of education and you just say, hey, I'm going to read this volume. I want to read it with people who want to join me. You will probably have some people who join you,
Yes.
even if it's only one other person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I just want to encourage anyone out there, like, get a friend, even if you don't know them very well, just get somebody to read the volumes with. It will make it so much more enjoyable. I heard recently a little trick from a gentleman. His name is Art. I don't remember his last name,
Middle class.
but Middlecoff. Okay, he takes men, dads, through the volumes, all 6 of them. I think they take 2 years to do it, but he tells everybody, if you will read just 3 pages a day, you will get through 2 volumes in a year. And I was like, oh, well, that seems way more doable. And that's so true with anything. Like, if you just take little bites, little chunks at a time, you will be amazed at the progress that you'll make. And so hopefully that can inspire and encourage somebody to just keep reading, and you'll look up and you've accomplished so much. You've read so much. You've learned, you've grown so much from just taking those small actions every single day. So I will link down after this in the show notes. That's what people say when they have podcasts. In the show notes, links to the Charlotte Mason volumes. It's nice now because I know, Rebecca, probably when you started reading the volumes several years ago, they were difficult to get a copy of. I've heard of people saying they had to go through some catalog to find them, or they would find them at a garage sale or something. They were a difficult thing to get a hold of not that long ago. And so now, I mean, we can get them pretty much anywhere. And so, again, what a gift. It's easy to get.
And you can get them free because they're
Yes,
in the public domain.
yes. If maybe it's not in your budget at the moment to buy them, you can go to AmblesideOnline.com. They have graciously put all the volumes on their website. So there literally is no excuse for anybody, whether you have the extra funds or not, you can read it for free. So encourage you, pick up the volumes. Let us know how, as you've read the volumes, or if you have read them already, how they have affected your life, obviously in a good way. So, Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me and for sharing about your journey through reading the volumes and how it has transformed your life. And I look forward to having you back on the podcast very soon, we're going to talk more about a different area of your life, and that is navigating learning differences, not only for you, but for also your children, and how, that using this method has really, again, been a blessing for your children who may have some learning differences and some challenges. And so we'll have you back on so we can talk about that. But that is all the time we have for today. Rebecca, what is it that you tell your students every day?
The only true education is self-education. That's what Charlotte Mason said. And so I'm always encouraging my students to grab a hold of their education.
Yes.
When kids that don't want to do it well, I say, I already have my education. You're only hurting yourself. Grab hold.
Yeah. It's so true. The only true education is self-education. And even though we are adults and in the 30 plus age bracket, we are still on our journey of learning. 50 plus. So just want to encourage you, remember that the only true education is self-education, and you never outgrow learning. So have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Elise.